Hey everyone, this is Magic Lover. Just wanted to chime in and do a little bit of a M14 set review in the two formats that I primarily play, which are Legacy and Commander. So first off, I wanted to do a little bit of a Legacy preview, just take a look at some cards that I think might have either a main deck or sideboard application in the format. First up on the list is Archangel of Thune, and while I think this is quite powerful, I don't think it's quite legacy viable. I think it's modern viable. I know there's been some talk about this with, like a persist style deck. So, certainly a 3/4 lifelink with this whenever. That holds true throughout Magic history. Whenever you see whenever, that's a combo enabler because it's certainly a powerful effect. So yeah, I could see this being a modern kind of hit, maybe spawning that deck, but I don't see it quite making the cut in Legacy. One card I am curious, not that I expect it to be main deck or even playable, but I would love to see how it would work as a sideboard option for a Show and Tell Omniscience deck to throw Dismiss into Dream into play as a way to deal with difficult creatures, a la like a Cephalid Breakfast kind of, very cheap activation, something that just targets a creature. So don't know what that would be, but I'm sure there's a list of 0 non-tap target a creature, so that an Omniscience player could put this into play and just machine gun opponents Emeralds and whatnot. So I'm curious if this becomes a sideboard option. If I had to bet, I'd say no, but certainly it's a very interesting effect. But that casting cost means it's got to be an Omniscience style type of play. Another one, another blue card I'm curious about is Quicken. Next sorcery card you cast this turn, maybe cast it so it flash, and it does cycle. So for one blue, it's at worst a cycle. But I'm curious because I just through my Magic playing career and Legacy, I've always thought of there's a couple really crazy sorceries that if you could play it on your opponent's turn, you just do some obscene things. Now, I really haven't gone through the list and tried to think back to that, but this did stand out in my mind as I wonder what that could do and if there's going to be a deck based around it. But anyway, curious about the implications for that. I'd really love Grim Return to be a little more powerful. I mean, as an instant, you can grab big nasty creatures like an Emrakul. Unfortunately, it's put there from the battlefield. Otherwise, this would be Reanimator on a stick. So it's not that, but it's just such a great effect, and I love this, the artwork on this card and everything. That I'd be curious to see if this has a legacy implication. But I think that the from the battlefield clause is going to keep it in check from being anything crazy. The new chandra is kind of interesting. I mean, still only really seeing this in a mono red shell, and I think red deck wins. Burn just has too many other good options than a 4-mana pinger. So I just unfortunately don't see this making much of an impact on Legacy at all. Here's something that I think would be curious if it does find a spot in like a red deck wins, is Wild Guess. As an additional cost to cast it, discard a card, draw 2 cards. For 2 mana, basically to pitch a useless land or a dead card in hand based on a matchup, to draw 2 in red. I don't know. I don't know if that's something that it gets boarded in for game 2 to get that late game advantage and to outclock your opponent. I don't really play red deck wins a lot, so I'm not sure if that's a viable option. But the casting cost is low enough and the effect big enough. Red just pretty much needs gas. If you got cards in hand, you're dealing burn to your opponent, and they almost always have, you know, an extra land they can pitch. So I'm curious if Wild Guess has a home. Speaking of having a home in red, I don't know if this will go into like a red deck wins or more of a Blurn deck, but I can see this guy. You know, I know a lot of people have compared him to like a mini Talrand kind of thing, but you know, you look at this in a you know, in a Blurn shell, and any instant or sorcery, you get a, you know, 1/1. That adds up pretty quick, and he's a 2/1, so isn't a, you know, good enough little beater on his own to add in a couple points. But certainly this, you know, for a an aggressive 1/2 drop deck like Blurn, this could be something. So I'd be curious if this makes the cut in like a Blurn Legacy build. On to green and the new Garrick, the most expensive Garrick, you know, Caller of Beasts. It's interesting. I mean, Garrick Caller of Beasts, it should just read, you know, this -2 should be Garrick, Putter of Craterhoof Behemoth onto the battlefield. You know, I could see someone casting him, and if they've got the creatures, you know, by the time you hit 6 mana in green, you've probably got a pretty decent board state unless someone's been really working on killing your creatures. You got a few. Craterhoof comes down, and bang, you're in for lethal. Or, you know, ticking up to find those creatures. You know, it goes to 5, so a little harder to kill. Hopefully you've got enough to at least chump out and find that next beauty. And of course, if you ever get to, you know, live the dream and hit his ultimate, then that's bonus time. But it'd be interesting. I'd love to goldfish a lot of matches and just see how many times anything other than Craterhoof is put onto the battlefield with this. I'm sure if it is, it'll be something called Progenitus. But other than that, interesting planeswalker. Here's one that, you know, I just, like I said before, anytime you see the word whenever on a permanent, you know it's combo enabled. And I think this might be the first time, I'll do a search later, but I can't imagine seeing 3 separate whenever triggers on a card. And Primeval Bounty, I mean, I can't wait to crack one of these. I don't know if it's cheap enough for Legacy, but you talk about value town. I mean, any creature gives you a 3/3. Any non-creature gives you essentially a 3/3 on top of your existing creature. You know, 3 +1/+1 counters. Even playing a land, or not even. And here's another benefit: not even playing a land, but whenever a land enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life. So if a fetch, you know, nets you 5. You know, that's pretty slick. I mean, that's a heck of a. So if you can ramp this out, you know, by turn 4 or so, I don't know. I think it'd be really tough to beat that deck unless you just shut them down, you know, by turn 4 or 5, by discard and who knows what else. But I'd be curious if that makes it. I don't think it will, just because the cost is too high and it's a do nothing when it comes in. That's kind of the kiss of death, but I'd be curious, because 3 whenevers, that's pretty slick. And not that it's a new card to make an impact on Legacy, but Scavenging Ooze, worth mentioning. You know, I had picked up a few just buying Commander, you know, gave boxes, and pretty much whatever they were selling it for was worth the Scavenging Ooze, and even higher recently. So this is, I think, knocking the price back close to what it was when I was picking them up at about $20. But it is nice to see that this had so much of an effect that Wizards did reprint it. I think it's worth noting Savage Summoning. You know, it's too bad Zoo really hasn't been a deck in a long time, but if it still was, and looked at this as the great 4-of sideboard to cram in against control, you know, this can't be countered. And it doesn't even say by spells or abilities, it just can't be countered. So really the only thing you're doing here is time stopping kind of a deal, or Mindbreak Trap and exiling it, but realistically this isn't going to get touched, and then obviously the next creature you play, that can't be countered either, and it gets a little bonus. So, this is kind of interesting. I think if it's cycled too, that might be enough to push it over the edge of value, but as it is, I don't see this being kind of the answer to, jamming your Tarmogoyf down through a spell snare. On to equipment. I am interested and curious to see if Strionic Resonator has any impact. I mean, I know Rings of Bright Hearth for a while was paired up with every planeswalker imaginable. Didn't prove to be, really legacy viable, but certainly fun to play and a powerful enough effect to gain consideration. So Strionic Resonator, copying triggered abilities, it's very interesting, and I'm curious if someone finds a home for this with some, massive triggered ability that's gonna seal up the game, because it is cheap enough, 2 to cast, 2 to trigger, or 2 to activate. It's got potential. And lastly, on the Legacy impact thoughts, it's nice to see Mutavault reprinted, just like Scavenging Ooze, as certainly that's a great card as a manland, obviously in tribal. Merfolk being the biggest home for it, but it is nice to see that as a reprint to keep the cost of that down. So anyway, that's my general thoughts. I don't think anything really is going to have a huge impact on Legacy, but a couple cards have potential. I'd be curious to see if there's some new decks and brews that take advantage of them. And anyway, thanks for watching.